Good Wednesday evening, everybody, and welcome to our Sports Medicine Forum here at Total Turf in Pittman, New Jersey. I'm your regular host, Chris Therien, former Philadelphia Flyer, and along with me I'm joined by Flyers head trainer Jim McCrossin. We've been running this for a few weeks. This is I believe our ninth one now. We've had some really great topics, all sports related, mostly pro injuries. We've had some golf discussion. We've talked about some of my career. We've dealt with a lot. Jimmy and Jess Harrison again joins us on the 9th episode. She was with us on the first one. But what's interesting, we're going to talk about some high school injuries today, and we're going to have this young man right here join us, Riley Harker. Great to see you, Riley. I know that you're a lacrosse player, and you're going to share your story with us. So. First off, Jimmy, before we get going, you had some numbers earlier that you pulled in the sheet right in front of us, and just looking at it in terms of the injuries for what we see in high school kids, head is still continually leads the race in every category for every sport: basketball, soccer, lacrosse, hockey, and football, which are the prevalent sports that you see in high school where kids move on to college. So some really interesting numbers, and I'm going to let you pick up on that, Jimmy, before we're at you and Jess, before we dive into Riley's story.
Thanks, Chris. Before we get started, I know the news to many of the kids that are in middle school and high school that play sports that we're going to be shutting down to at least January 11th was a kick. It was really a kick in the gut to you because it wasn't that long ago, yes it was, I was a high school athlete, and to be able to be shut down like that, you can look at it two ways. It's the old cliche, two men stood behind the bars, one looked at the mud, one looked at the stars. Think about it this way, it's almost like you've got a reprieve to go ahead and get yourself in better shape, and you think about it. Know that we have 5 weeks to continue your training. Now for ice hockey it's tough because they're going to be closing the rinks. But for other sports, you can come to places like the Energy Lab and work with our trainers and get yourself into better shape. For those of you that are coming off fall sports and got nicked up and dinged up a little bit and need to rehab and get yourself into that playing shape either for the winter session or spring session, you can come and see somebody like Jess, a physical therapist. Yeah, Chris, we're talking about head injuries. I mean, you think about it right across the sport, and I'm having here, and this is from the University of Colorado, a study they did, funded by the Center of Disease Control and Prevention. Football, 34% of injuries to the head. Ice hockey, 18%. And being on the concussion committee at one point, I know that many of the injuries aren't from the helmet that we wore, right? It wasn't from you landing on your head. Think about it, how many times did you actually land on your head when you played the game?
One time.
Right. And how many games did you play?
A lot.
A lot. It's from that counter coup, right? Jess is a physical therapist who deals with concussion. I deal with concussion, and I know this is Riley's show here too, but number one injury is head injuries. But it's from being hit in the chest, head snapping back and coming back down. We're seeing many of our kids with concussions, right? Number two, right? And this is where we're going to segue right into you, Riley, is that knee injuries, all right? And obviously you were playing for Lacrosse, but why don't you tell us your story?
Go, Riley.
Thank you. I actually didn't tear my ACL. Well, I tore my ACL back in February of this year, but I didn't tear my ACL playing lacrosse. I tore it skiing. And at first I didn't really think anything happened. I was just going down the slope and I twisted my knee and I walked on it right afterwards, and I was like, oh, I'm fine. I probably just sprained it. I had to go down to the ski patrol lodge. They had to sled me down the hill, and all my friends recorded me while they were going up the ski lift, so that kind of sucked. But they took me down to the lodge, and they were like, yeah, you probably just sprained it. So I went back home that day. It was the Super Bowl. My friends came over. I had a little cardboard knee brace on, and I was watching the Super Bowl with my friends. And then a couple days later, I got an MRI, and then I found out I tore my ACL, and I cried a lot. So that was a really hard moment. But then I knew I had to do what I had to do because I wanted to play lacrosse in college, and now I'm going to be able to do that at the Division II level. So that's really exciting. but Jess really helped me a lot and got me to where I am now because she was my physical therapist for the past 8 months, and it's just been a journey, ups and downs, and finally graduated to a bigger cuff sleeve for BFR today, so pretty big step. I don't really know what else to say.
We'll get back to it, and that's great stuff, Riley, too. We want to hear about your recovery. We're going to talk to Jess about that. I got a quick skiing story as well. Jimmy wouldn't remember it, I don't think, but I actually, some people know this, but I actually quit hockey at 14 years old for an entire year, and I skied. I took the bus after school and went skiing. And so anyway, when I finally became pro and took hockey more seriously around 17, 18, I never skied again until we had an Olympic break. I think it was 2002 or 98 or 2002, and I decided it was a good time for me to go back and ski again. So I went up to north of Canada and I went skiing for 4 days straight, and I came back for practice on the Monday. I think it was Jimmy or maybe even John. Well, it was Jimmy. I said, gee, the back of my calves went halfway up are really, really sore on both sides. He said, how'd that happen? I said, I have really no idea. Well, they knew right away. I had the ski boot up as high as the middle of your calf, and that was the end of my skiing career. It was the last time I skied, but I'm glad I got away with it because you can't bump into some injuries. Jess, what did you deal with when you were with Riley, and what did his recovery entail?
So anyone that's familiar with ACL Rehab knows that it's just a long road in general. And Riley would tell you that we try to make it as fun as we can because we know that you're going to be there long term. But in the grand scheme of things, Riley was a good individual to work with because his mindset, he already came in knowing that he had that long road to deal with. And he just kind of approached it with like, I know I need to do the basic things first to set that foundation. So the biggest thing when you're coming to physical therapy post-op ACL is you want to make sure that you understand it's going to be a long road and it will have its points of frustration, but you're there to be part of a team, and your physical therapist is going to be with you that whole time. And then if you're coming to a facility like we have here, you get to transition into our bridge program and into our strengthening program where you have Mike Vitas, who's also going to be with you that whole time. And they were incorporated in his program from the beginning so that he could see the end result even from the first time he came through the door. So I think the biggest thing is to think about the mental aspect of rehab and setting out those long-term goals, even when they're just there working on a quad set.
I'm going to throw this right back to you guys. When you talk about, you actually mentioned the mental part of it. How debilitating can it be actually for a young guy like this to have an injury? It affects your sports career in high school, you say, because people are now looking for the opportunity to play in college at the next level. How much of that was it mental? I mean, you said, yeah, you know, I cried when I found out about my ACL. Yeah, that's worth crying over at your age. Did it affect the level of college you were going to play that injury, or were you pretty much destined to be a D2 athlete?
The goal was always to play Division I, and I think while my ACL did, I think it might have impacted me a little bit, but only because of the Corona times. Because if there was more, so basically last year, all of the seniors in the NCAA were given an extra year of eligibility. So my recruiting class was even smaller. So it was difficult for me to kind of sneak in there and be like, hey, can you wait on me until February? I'll be able to play. A lot of Division I coaches were kind of like, yeah, we can't. We don't really have that many spaces. So that kind of stunk, but I don't know. It is what it is, and I'm happy where I am.
I know I have an older senior now at Loyola that went through the same thing, so she's got an extra year of eligibility because of COVID, and appreciate that. You'd be a good college athlete because you got a good attitude towards it, and that's what you want. Jimmy, you talked about some of these with the mental part. How much of that, Jess, do you guys deal with the actual kid dealing with, as well as the physical part, but also the mental rehabilitation that you have this injury and you've got to get over it?
Let me take one and I'll give you the rest. I think the mental part's the toughest part. I agree. I mean, I did my knee back in 1976, and I cried, and it hurt, and I cried because back then, what the heck's an ACL? Right? What's an LCL? I didn't know, and we didn't have athletic trainers, and physical therapy was just coming to the forefront. Not that it wasn't around, but really to rehab sports injuries was just coming to the forefront. And it made you wonder. I've always kept that in the back of my mind when I was rehabbing people like Chris and rehabbing guys myself, because it's an important factor that sets goals. And you've got to keep it in black and white. That the athlete needs to know where they should be, because physical therapy, Jess, you can attest to it, doesn't end when an athlete leaves your doors. It occurs when they're at home. They've got to follow a home program. They've got to do their chore, because you know what, we need to get them back. We want to get them back, but we want to get them back safe and sound and not rush them back, right? You want to go back and play lacrosse at D2 level, that's phenomenal, right? We don't want you back again, right? Because we don't want repeat performers, and I think Jess can attest to it, correct?
I think one way to put what we're talking about in terms of the mental aspect into perspective for anyone that hasn't had an injury is just think about the past year, 2020. People are complaining about the things they've had to not do. That's what happens to an athlete that has an injury. They have to adapt for that next year because of that injury. So just try and put that into perspective and think about what kind of mental things you're dealing with, having had to take out your social career or your social aspects of life, and like their whole athletic career is now put on pause for an entire year because of an injury. So maybe that's the one thing 2020 has given us, is it gives us a way to correlate what people might be experiencing when they have an injury that takes them out of athletics.
I think one other thing we have to keep in the back of our minds, either being an athlete, being the head trainer, and being a physical therapist, is that our younger kids, right, high school, middle school, high school, they get injured the same way as professional athletes get injured. Two different mindsets though, right? One, that athlete made it, right? They're getting paid. But yet they may be on a contract year, so they've got things they have to worry about too. High school athletes, such as yourself, right? I'm trying to get a scholarship. I want to play D2. I want to play D1. I want to go D3. Whatever it is, right? The injuries, the mechanism of injury is the same. However, the injury itself could be completely different, because now athletes, we're seeing athletes younger and younger getting these horrific injuries, right? Doesn't matter if it's a knee, ankle, whatever, and their bones are growing quicker than their muscles, and things are starting to pull off. So then we're seeing not only ACLs, but we're seeing growth plate injuries, right? We're seeing things that are scary, and then we have to piece them back together again with the help of the physicians. But that's why we need people like you, right, with the right mindset, and make sure that the rehab goes well and that you're doing things at home.
That's something I think we've all heard is the growth plate injuries, right? When kids get them, and whether it's a knee or a sprained ankle or whatever it is. I'm just remembering my own girl's son going through the years, but how much of that is actually what does it affect, and how does it affect it when you have a growth plate issue from an injury?
It's kind of crazy. About 3 years ago, we had two former players on our team who had kids playing high school hockey, and they were both hit, and they were low-bridged, and it caused a solid Harris fracture. And that's when you fracture the long bone of the leg. It's the femur got fractured, and one had sustained an injury to his growth plate. So what happens when you sustain an injury to your growth plate and you're not fully grown, right? One leg can actually grow a little bit longer than the other leg. Fortunate for this athlete, that did not occur. For the other athlete, there was not a growth plate injury. However, you can have like a taloa fracture of the ankle that goes right through the growth plates of both the tibia and the fibula. And then you need the right doctors, the right rehab to really get these injuries back and get them back right. Right, Jess? Think about it.
I actually just had an athlete I was rehabbing for a growth plate fracture in her ankle, but luckily for her it wasn't displaced, so we just had to immobilize her long enough that it would heal so that we could strengthen her. So while we can't prevent a fracture at the growth plate itself, what we can help is as you're growing, like Jimmy said, your bones are growing faster than your muscles are growing. So it's kind of like you're turning into a Gumby in the sense of you kind of lose control of your limbs because your muscles just aren't catching up. So if you come see us in terms of physical therapy or your athletic trainer, we can do an assessment to try and help rebuild the muscle essentially to help control that longer bone. So now you're improving your motor control, which will help decrease the chance of having an injury like Riley's, where it was more like a cutting injury. If you have more control, it's less likely that injuries like that can occur.
One more thing here, Chris, is that the number of injuries to high school athletes is staggering. I mean, you think about it, 3.2 million injuries a year are reported to high school athletes, right? And 1/3 of them are from sport. Now, that's including, when they include sport, okay, in that number, that's your club hockey, that's your club basketball, you know, it's all your different clubs, plus your high school sports. But 3.5 million injuries a year for high school athletes. It's just staggering. Number one injury is what, right? Sprains and strains, right? A sprain, ACL sprain, a muscle strain, right? And as we spoke, you know, that it can be horrific because an ankle sprain, you know, you hear the old cliche, well, it's better to break your ankle. Not all the time, trust me. But we're finding out more and more that ACLs, ankle sprains, should take longer. They should be in rehab longer, even when they return, to make sure that the reoccurrence rates aren't going to happen again, correct?
Yeah, and that comes back to that motor control and what we call proprioception. So the ligaments that are typically involved in a sprain give information to your brain that lets your body know where that joint is in space. So in order to retrain that, you need to work on balance and then incorporating balance into more dynamic tasks so you can transition an athlete safely back to sport. So for a while we were missing a larger balance component, and now that we know that that is a bigger component, we're seeing those individuals stay in rehab a little bit longer to make sure that's fully addressed so that we're retraining the proprioceptive component.
So we got the first part. We actually could go down the list of injuries and most things that we most commonly see at the high school level. Interestingly enough, that the high school injuries do happen as often as professional injuries and college injuries. So it tells you, the level of compete that you high school kids go through. I remember Jimmy, Jess. It's a huge part of our society. I think it's great that kids do play, but yes, injuries will happen, and there's no difference what level you're at. The second thing that is, I guess, would be the one that really jumps out, especially for guys that play more games or more sports, girls, is the overuse injuries. This was something, even when I played, I still had problems with my left shoulder. And again, the more you use it over and over again, back-to-back games, you'd feel it that much worse on Monday morning if you had a Saturday, Sunday back-to-back games. So anything, we even talked about a couple weeks ago with the golf, guys continually golfing, and you have that same motion. So how prevalent is overuse injuries, and is that something that can be prevented or at least controlled to a certain degree?
I think we can hopefully reduce the risk of an overuse injury. Jimmy Andrews, the well-known orthopedic doctor down in Alabama, probably about 10 years ago gave a lecture on overuse injuries and what are we doing to our children. And because they're not changing up sports. When I was a kid, but we played multiple sports, right? We played multiple sports, but we're not seeing that as often. So I can attest to it. We have kids at the skate zone playing hockey about 360 days a year and just getting beat like a mule. And at some point, the wear and tear is going to take hold. Dr. Andrews said, we're seeing injuries today in our, now I know Raul's happy birthday, buddy, 18 years old today, right? But we're seeing injuries in our 14, 15-year-olds that we didn't see until our mid-20s before. Then when we're 18, 19, 20, we're seeing overuse injuries that we didn't see until our 30s. So can they be prevented? What do you think, Jess?
I think it can, but it does take a lot of education, and a lot of it does start with not having a year-round season. So I've had athletes before, specifically with softball, where they have multiple sports they're playing on year-round. So if you think about someone that has a deficit in their throwing mechanics, and now instead of just having that in a season, you're extrapolating that over 365 days, there's going to be a breakdown component because they're going to find a compensation and they're going to keep using that until it doesn't work anymore. And at the point when it doesn't work, they either have an overuse injury or they fortunately maybe are smart enough to come see someone that can help them work outside of that compensation and strengthen them so that they can have proper mechanics. So I think a lot of it is being aware of what you're doing on your everyday, and if you think you're falling into some sort of compensatory pattern, go and see someone that can evaluate that from the outside, whether that's your physical therapist, your athletic trainer. Here at the Energy Lab, we have a strength and conditioning coach that's very good at analyzing movement, or if you have a throwing coach that you really trust who has a good relationship with an athletic trainer or a physical therapist, those are all people that can help you analyze your movement better so that we can correct it and get the strengthening and the motor control to where we need it to be so we see less of those overuse injuries.
It's the old cliche of taking care of business before business takes care of you. And you don't, everything an athlete should be doing is training properly. And if you don't know, if you think you're not doing it right, see the specialist, right? Physical therapist, athletic trainer. But keep in the back of your mind too, rest is a powerful weapon. Chris, we used to say that in hockey, I mean, we still do, because rest is a powerful weapon. You don't have to be working out 360 days a year. You're going to break down, just like a car would break down.
That's a great point. I'm a big advocate too of playing multiple sports. I think at this age, it's huge. I've coached AAA hockey, and I had my son play football this year, stepping back in hockey a little bit. It's been great. And I think it gives kids an opportunity. Playing 12 months a year, you're right, especially at 12, 13, it's insane. But you can't explain that to anybody because everybody's got their own recipe for the cake, and that's fine too. We're going to go to number 3 here, and part of it is stress fractures. And really what we're talking about here is essentially the warm-ups, right? And how important it is for kids to be prepared before their sport.
I think it's warm-up, I think it's proper footwear, but stress fractures just don't happen in the feet, right? It can happen anywhere, and but it's going out prepared, proper footwear, proper warm-up, proper cool-down, and not overuse. The overuse and stress fractures kind of go hand in hand. Would you agree?
Well, and also a piece that I think sometimes we not neglect, but we don't touch on quite as much because we're movement people is the nutrition aspect. So if someone's not eating enough, they can predispose themselves to having an overuse injury, specifically of the bones, which would be in the case of a stress fracture. But again, it's an overuse injury where those muscles are not taking the proper, they're not working properly, so you're getting all of that impact into the bone versus into the muscle. So your muscle's like a spring, and you want that to work as best it can so that you're not putting that direct impact on the bone, which is a hard surface.
And the last one, at number 4, ones we see the most of the slide we've discussed already, and that's the head and neck injuries, right? Jimmy kind of said a little bit, when you get a snapback of your head, sometimes that's where the injury happens, from head injuries. As I said, with hockey, I mean, there's a lot of different ones. Lacrosse, you may see more, stick to the head accident when guys swat. I mean, it does happen. I've seen lacrosse games. Soccer, you can tell there's not, there are head injuries because, and people don't realize in soccer, too, you get concussions from taking balls off the head all day long. People don't realize that. That's why you have to attack the ball with your head. That's not really from my great soccer skills as a kid or anything, just from watching and hearing over the years. But when you talk about head and neck injuries really quick, because we're almost out of time, but I mean, how big is that? Is preventative measures have come such a long way in the last 20 years.
They have. I can speak for the NHL. I think we've done a really good job over the past 20 years. And it's a work in progress for every sport. You see what football's doing about headshots to the head, right? You see what's going on with the NHL. People aren't hitting much anymore. But and when you see it, when you see a shot that mainly happens when a forward may be up along the boards, maybe that little distance there, and they set themselves up for being hurt as they crash into the boards. But there's also injuries that you see in gymnastics, right? That people were falling down, hurting their necks, hurting their heads. Then you can't forget pole holding, because you think about it, as you go up, come down, if that pole actually breaks up there, which it does at times, you're going to come down and you're going to see really either a concussion or a cervical neck injury.
So I actually primarily treat concussion, and so the big question is people ask, how do you prevent something that is thought to be just an impact injury? So some of the things they're correlating to helping with prevention of concussion is your peripheral vision, your reaction time, and then also your cervical or your neck strength. And so that comes to where Jimmy's talking about like a pole vaulter. You're getting that whiplash effect, so anytime that your head is moving very quickly, if your neck is stronger, it can help control that. If you're lacking that cervical strength, you will end up getting that counter-coup effect because your brain sits in fluid inside of your skull. So if you think about a bobblehead, if that neck is just whipping forward, the brain has to go somewhere, and so it ends up impacting on the skull itself. So those are things that we look at when we are trying to assess like preseason to see if we can help strengthen cervical to eliminate or decrease the chance of concussion, and then also something that I look at when I'm seeing someone post-concussion. So again, we're decreasing the risk of a second injury.
Correct me if I'm wrong, just strengthening of the cervical area should be part of your repertoire when you're training, but to do it right.
Yes.
Yeah, I get it. I know there's a lot of, but that's where, again, it comes to making sure you see a credible person.
Yes.
And not doing some crazy stuff with your neck that you shouldn't be doing, right? Because there's some funky exercises out there that I just cringe at. There's some really good ones out there that we know that are excellent for you. So that should be a part of your repertoire because a lot of people don't train their neck. Right? They don't do it. But again, when in doubt, seek out an expert, all right? And if you don't know who that is, come see us here at the Energy Lab.
Don't use the cervical strengthening machine at your gym. It's not a good one. I just have to say that. It's not what we want you to do.
Because you'll be seeing Jess soon.
So we can't like tie a rope to 245 plates and hang them off the back of our neck. Start doing extensions. You know, it's funny, you laugh about that. That's what used to happen, remember? I'd see you guys do crazy stuff doing neck exercises. And you're right, it seems like the neck exercises have actually gone downhill a lot over the last few years. All right, we're going to take a couple questions, but we're going to finish up here. We're not going to sing a happy birthday or anything like that. Did you have fun? Yeah. How do you, and I want to ask you though, really quick, as we wrap up, how are you feeling? I mean, this happened in February, right? Right before the corona pandemic. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling really good. I'm almost back to 100%. I'm excited to start playing lacrosse at full speed again. I've started to start captain's practices because I'm a captain for my high school team, and I kind of just have to coach the 1v1s and everything. I can't really run full speed with everybody and play defense, but I'm really excited, and I look forward to getting beat up when I come here every week.
Give a shout out to your school.
Who's your school?
I play for Kingsway Regional High School, and I'm going to go to Chestnut Hill College in the fall of next year.
Yes.
This year, actually.
Excellent. That's great stuff. Congratulations. I know you're going to make both those schools very proud.
Thanks.
Good luck in the upcoming year. Jimmy, you got some sponsors. We'll wrap this up. I'll say goodbye right now. And from our sponsors, Jess Erickson, Riley Harker. There you go, Jimmy.
Before I thank our sponsors, I just want to say that I did have two other guests, high school students. Mackenzie Campbell, okay, she's a female hockey player, a defense woman, and real good, who went through a real bad lower leg injury that was out all last season, came back, and again, she was devastated, but she was diagnosed, or her brother, Austin, was diagnosed with COVID. So again, keeping that socially distancing, keep away with her. And Austin, her brother, he's 13 years old, and he's been battling, he's an athlete, he's a hockey player, and he's a baseball player. And he's been battling non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I want to give him a shout out because he just had his PET MRI and things are looking good, all right? And but he was diagnosed with COVID. And that's a whole different battle you have to fight there. But one of the battles with that is that the doctors wanted him to stay as strong as possible. So he was seeing myself and seeing the physical therapist and keeping himself in shape. So I want to give him kudos for that, because going through chemo wipes you out, and for those of you who've been through it. Then he had to go through radiation. And hopefully, keep our fingers crossed, he doesn't have to go through anything more, but we'll keep in our thoughts and prayers. But their sponsors tonight, Total Turf, right? Thank you, Jerry and his gang for sponsoring this. Recon Orthopedics, thank you. The Energy Lab, where sports meets science, again, thank you very much. And to all of our fans, we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you very much.